let's talk about what is happening with Jamaica and the Cuban doctors, because there's a lot of information that I do not believe that the public is aware, or they have chosen to be willfully ignorant to. And this is not about Camina's response, because no doubt I believe it is very disingenuous on the part of government or foreign affairs minister to be skirting around the issue that this also is in some part due to geopolitical pressures. And I say some part, not all part, and I'm going to explain why. No, this is not about whether or not Jamaica needs the Cuban doctors, and whether or not there is tremendous value in us being able to get access to Cuban doctors and nurses. This is not about whether or not we appreciate the fact that every single time in a crisis, especially a crisis that has medical implications, Cuba has stepped up. This is not to say that Jamaica has not benefited from that arrangement. My concern is benefited at what cost? Now, I hear people referring, saying Motley, oh, Motley did not say that they were going to end the agreement. The big difference with Barbados and Jamaica, and the intricacies of the agreements we each hold independently with Cuba, is that Barbados pays the Cuban doctors and nurses directly into a personal account held by the individual. Guyana as well continues to have an agreement in place where they are able to employ doctors and nurses in large delegations from time to time from Cuba. Once more, the Guyanese terms and condition allows them to pay these doctors directly. The problem is because our agreement was set up by someone who was a massive supporter of communism, our agreement differs substantially. Our agreement means that we pay the Cuban government directly for the employment of these individuals, and the Cuban government in turn gives these doctors and nurses a stipend that is an insult to reference as even a livable wage. Most of them, their lifestyle never improve. When they eventually go home, nothing about their lifestyle at home will improve, because they're not paid enough to improve their lifestyle. On top of that, our Cuban doctors and nurses are out here do not hold their own travel documents. The government of Cuba holds those travel documents hostage. Now, the agreement that we have in place came up for review again in 2023 when it expired. And for over a year, the Jamaican government has been renegotiating the terms of those conditions. The two primary terms that were being renegotiated was, one, that the doctors and nurses are allowed to be paid directly, and two, that they are allowed to hold their own travel documents. Cuba didn't agree to this. Mind you, as I said before, this is not what stands with a lot of other Caribbean countries that have continued to honor the agreement. What Jamaica has been doing is a party to the exploitation of the Cuban people. We have been funding communism more so than paying these individuals for the impact that they're making in Jamaica. Whether or not anyone like to hear it, that is the reality of the situation. Now, one of the big arguments, oh, but these persons go to school for free. No, hold on. Another little bit of information you need to know. Cuba is not the only communist country that educates its citizens for free. But most importantly, Cuba is not the only communist regime that educates our Jamaican students for free. When our Jamaican students go to Russia to study dentistry or engineering, or to go to China to study engineering or medicine, they return home, and a part of the conditions of the current agreement is that they're bonded here for 5 years. Now, bonding is understandable. If the government of Cuba says that you are bonded to Cuba for 5 years, and during those 5 years you have to pay a percentage of your income over to the government of Cuba as a means of them further funding the education of other citizens, I could understand. But that's not what is happening here. What is happening is a lifetime of servitude where these people are held hostage because they don't even hold their own personal travel documents. That is the reality of what is happening here. Now, the government of Jamaica, when said, right, that these terms have been sitting on the steps or on the laps of Cuban government for them to agree to for months upon months. When it was not agreed, the Jamaican government did not send the 285 doctors and nurses back to Cuba. They brought to the table a proposal that these individuals would be able to negotiate individual contracts with the government. The Cuban government then decides they are not releasing these persons' documentation and instead issue an order for these doctors and nurses to return home. So here is my bit. And this is not a comment on US and what US is doing in Venezuela and Cuba. That's a whole different conversation. And this doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with that, or what is happening globally right now. But in terms of Cuba, Cuba has clearly chosen communism over its own citizens. So why are we criticizing our own government for choosing our own country over continuing to exploit the Cuban people? This is not about whether or not we benefit. The issue is at what cost did we benefit?